myself included, plus a worldwide network of people, have been studying how knowledge works in countries, in organizations, in networks. And I thought perhaps it might be a good idea in the small time we have to just give you some findings, some conclusions, some things we collectively have learned about knowledge in the world. I'm sorry, this is perhaps the single worst way to talk about knowledge, sage on a stage, someone standing up here lecturing you. As I'm sure all of you know who've been to universities, this is a terrible way to exchange knowledge, but here we are. So I'm just going to tell you these things and then walk away, and you're going to have to ponder them yourself. I'd be happy to answer questions, but there's no time for it. If you want to send me an email, I'll answer them if I can. Let's talk a little about knowledge as distinct from information. Now we're going to talk about a different subject. Now I know many of you here are fascinated with information management, a subject I have written about and agree with. Very important subject. You can't run an organization, you can't do anything without information. But it's not the same thing as knowledge. Don't conflate the two things. If you can remember one thing I'm telling you, they are different things. You could say information is knowledge that's represented and codified. Represented and codified. But they're not the same thing. If they were the same thing, the world would look like a very different place than what it is. Data isn't information. Information isn't knowledge. Knowledge isn't wisdom. These are separate things with separate words for good reason. It's only in English we have one word for knowledge. You know, most languages have 2, 3 words. Classical Greek had 5 words for knowledge, which made much more sense. So, let me put on my glass. Don't get older. Here's the best advice I can give you. There's very little in it. Trust me, I know that's true. So, knowledge is a very different economic entity, a very different thing than the traditional sources of wealth, which are land, labor, and capital. Land, labor, and capital, which is most of our economics is based on, is depleted when you use it. Knowledge is not depleted when you use it. You gain more knowledge. I mean, I don't leave this room acting stupider. I don't lose knowledge by giving you what I know. It's a different type of thing. It's elastic, almost infinitely. You can do all sorts of things with it. It's a very different thing. It grows with use. It's very asymmetric, very asymmetric. And it's intimately tied up with other things, externalities, economists say. Trust, cognitive authority, unlike land, labor, and capital, which are somewhat more standalone things. This is a whole, you can read 10 books on this subject. It's very, very interesting. But if the economy of your country or any organization is based on knowledge, you need very different indicators and understanding for how knowledge works. You cannot use standard economics. It won't work. Standard economics, political science, sociology is based on information. And knowledge is a different thing. Knowledge is what groups of people know. Deep, rich understanding. Deep, rich context. Tacit heuristics. These are different things than information, which is a message. Information can best be understood as a message. It has a sender, it has a receiver, it's bounded by a repository, and the intent of information is to inform you. Knowledge is a flow. It's what groups of people know. If I had to find synonyms for knowledge, if the word knowledge was banned from the English language, I would use understanding, meaning, or context. So here's one of the things we learned about knowledge. It is profoundly social. Profoundly social. In fact, some philosophers have said there's no such thing as individual knowledge, just individual memories. Those countries and those organizations that have trust and high social functioning have a tremendous advantage in a knowledge-based economy. One of the least valuable things the United States and the UK have bestowed to the world is a cult of individualism. Because individualism may be very useful for certain things, but it's terrible for knowledge. It doesn't matter what individuals know. It matters greatly what groups of people know. Now, what do I mean by groups? Practices, communities, networks, things. That's where you find knowledge. Knowledge clumps in groups, usually 50 to 300 or 400 people, sometimes thousands of people. You have what we call invisible colleges, researchers around the world connected electronically who trust each other and share knowledge. So it's profoundly social. Knowledge is also local, sticky, and contextual. Local. You made that point earlier, Sharon. The most valuable knowledge is the interface between a worker and a workforce, between someone doing something. That's what, from the little I've learned, it's little because I had not enough time, of understanding how humanitarian organizations work. The real knowledge is in the field. It's where people actually doing the work. And that's true for organizations, that's true everywhere. We still live in a world which has headquarters and has the field. In organizations in the United States, we say someone's at the head office or in the field. That's dead. In a knowledge-based world, that's absolutely irrelevant. Knowledge is most useful when it's local. It's also sticky. That's a technical word economists use, sticky. Knowledge stays where it is. It's very hard to move it. It's not transferable the way land, labor, and capital is. $12 trillion goes around the world every day, along with all sorts of futures and options and contracts. You can't move knowledge that way. If you could, a lot of the problems you people are addressing would be solved like this. No, medical knowledge, just send it here. You can send information like this around the world, anyone with a computer. Press buttons, you can send information. You can't send knowledge. If you could, it'd be a very different world. One of the great revolutions of the late 20th century, if someone's writing a history of the world 500 years from now, they will really note, I'm sure, is the absolute plummeting of transaction costs for information. Information has become ubiquitous, cheap, easily accessible. It used to be a very expensive thing. Certain countries had a monopoly on information. Certain areas had monopolies on information. Gone. That is dead. But it's not true for knowledge. It's not true for knowledge. Knowledge is a very expensive thing to buy, to develop, retain, and transfer. Again, it's an expensive thing. That's why people don't like working with it. They just assume, well, let's just send out 1 million documents. Something like e-learning is a good example of that. Companies and organizations don't like spending money to actually teach people, so they give you a disk instead. It's much cheaper. It's not effective at all, but it's a lot cheaper. Knowledge